I'm coming to you from Kansas City, but I'm originally from New York, which is where my extended family all came from. And my mother is 100% Armenian, and my father was 100% French Canadian. And my mother, while I was growing up, I was very well aware of her Armenian heritage. But my father was military, and I grew up with three brothers all around the United States, and we were in Europe for a while. And I was never close to an Armenian community. Where I was born in New York was an Armenian community, but I never really lived there. And I was never really exposed to Armenian culture, heritage, language, or anything like that. And unfortunately, because my mother's parents were immigrants, and feared discrimination and their children being discriminated against, they really encouraged my mother and her brothers to just speak English. So the only time she ever heard Armenian was out in the community or with her grandmother. Her grandmother only spoke English, only spoke Armenian. But other than that, my mother never really knew very much about her heritage because it was kept quiet, because her grandparents had suffered such a tragedy through the Armenian genocide. They just never spoke of it. And my mother never really knew anything about other family other than her grandparents. And so as I was growing up, all I knew was that my great-grandparents had come just before the genocide, actually. They had been fleeing some massacres that were happening in different parts of Turkey at the time, and Turkey was actually my Armenian native homeland, not today's borders of Armenia, but before, Turkey had been the native Armenian homeland. And so my mother she didn't know anything about her heritage, really, other than that they were Armenian and that they had fled massacres that eventually ended up turning into what is now known as the Armenian genocide. And she didn't know anything about her family. And though I had asked and I knew the names of the villages that they were from, that was really the extent of it. Until 2013, when, as Suzanne explained to you from my bio, my mother gave me a box of photos that had been in my grandmother's closet. The photos belonged to her mother, my great-grandmother. And they were clearly from the homeland. They were clearly from Turkey, most of them anyway, because of you could tell just by the photo, by the clothing, that they were not in the United States. And I was going through these pictures and I was like, Mom, where in the world did these come from? And she told me that when my grandmother died in 1986, my uncle, my mother's brother, went and cleaned out the house, found the photos, put them in his desk in Pennsylvania, where they stayed until 2013. And he looked through them and put them in a drawer. And they were not labeled. And so I'm looking through all these pictures. Finally, my uncle gave them to my mother. And so then we are looking through these pictures. I'm like, Mom, who are these people? And she told me that she didn't know. It was one I don't know after another as we're looking through like 30, 40 pictures. She didn't know who they were. And I'll start scrolling through the program here.
Okay, hold on 1 second, Tracy, hold on. I'm having problems going to the next page. Hold on. Is that livable for you?
Yeah,
is that livable? Okay, I'm now on slide 2.
Okay, that's fine. So these are only just a few of the pictures that we found in this shoebox, and my mom didn't know who any of these people were. And of course they weren't labeled. So it was, I'm just clicking through, you can kind of go down through those pictures there. This one, these pictures that one right there, clearly some kind of a classroom or something. It's all girls. They're holding weaving looms and books, and my mom didn't know who any of these people were, and it wasn't labeled. The next one shows what looks like travel clothes, obviously a wedding photo. You can see the one gentleman with the mustache is clearly the same man in both photographs. And then in the next photo, again, there's the same gentleman with and so I'm thinking, Mom, this has to be somebody, it can't just be friends. You know, it's the same guy in all these photos. And then we got to the next one of this beautiful family. And I just became, I don't know, just like obsessed with this photo. And interestingly enough, you can see they look like they're in America. And I'm like, Mom, these people don't even look like, it's clearly, it looks like the same man, now older with family, but it's the same guy. It must be related somehow to your great-grandmother, but we didn't know who it was. And it looked like they were in the United States. So this just kicked off this fascination for me. It's like, we've got to figure out who these people are. And it just sent me off on this quest to find out the names of these people and see if we could finally, after all these years, because my great-grandmother died in 1958. And obviously the photos then went to her daughter, my grandmother, but they stayed in a closet. My mother had never seen these photographs. No one. My mother, none of her brothers had ever seen these photographs. They stayed hidden in my grandmother's closet. And then they went to my uncle's closet after my grandmother died for like another 17 years until they finally came to me. And so it was just this passion that suddenly lit in me that I had to find out who these people were. The next one I just stuck in for fun. Sorry, couldn't help myself. We were waiting for a long time for that one, and I'm wearing my red shirt. So anyway, continuing on. So in the process of searching for my family tree and my ancestry, I learned one important lesson. Above everything else is that if we really understood the relationships and how close some of these relationships are, third cousins, fourth cousins, even fifth cousin once removed, okay? If we understood how they tied us to our own direct line ancestry, we would have a much greater appreciation for finding living descendants, even distant ones. Because in my search since 2013, so it's been like 6 years now, since I've been doing this, no matter where I search, no matter what records I have been able to find, nothing has been more valuable than finding living descendants who had information about my direct line. I have valuable information that I got from fifth cousins once removed. And what I keep finding over and over again as I'm talking to people, as they're talking about DNA testing, as they're talking about, someone got a hold of me through Ancestry or whatever, I'm surprised at how many people brush aside contact from a third cousin or a fourth cousin or a fifth cousin because they think it's too far removed. But when you look at this chart and you can see where you are on the left, I can't read it in that small print. Let's see. Your fourth cousin is the like great grandchild of your great grandfather's brother or sister, right? And you might not have information, you might not have photographs of a third or fourth great grandparent, but they might, because you share a great grandparent somewhere in the line. And again, this is like the number one thing that I try to communicate in every conference I do, no matter who I'm talking to, Armenian or not, is never brush aside a relation when somebody's trying to get in touch with you, or you find someone, but oh, they're a fifth cousin. Don't brush it aside. It might not be anything, but it might be a gold mine. And in my instance, in my circumstances and my experiences, everything has taught me to never turn down those opportunities to get information from other people. So my quest began, and the next slide, you can see I started with just trying to find obituaries for my great-grandparents, because there, as far as we knew and from everything we'd heard, there was no records for Armenians because they were intentionally destroyed. When the Armenians were killed, when they were walked into the desert or shot or killed or hanged or put in gas chambers, and all the same kinds of things you hear about from genocide to genocide, the churches were also intentionally destroyed. The records were intentionally destroyed. And if I were to try to go, and this happens all the time even now, if I were to go to Turkey now and try to get records on my ancestors, it's very, very convenient that the only years you can get are from before 1890, before the massacre started, and after 1933, after everything was kind of done, taken care of, and most of the Armenians were either dead or gone anyway. I can't access records from in the time when the massacres happened. They have them, but you're not allowed to, they're not viewable to the public. And so there's no church records. You can't get this kind of information. And the only link I had between the United States of America and Turkey was my great-grandparents as the original immigrants. So if I could find an obituary for them, because they did die here in the United States, then I might be able to find some trace of information. So I did that. And this, the page that was just before there that was Google newspapers. There are newspapers that are free on the internet. Okay, so I didn't even have a subscription to Ancestry. I didn't have subscriptions to newspaper archives or anything like that. I just did a Google search for old newspapers, and I found the obituaries for my great-grandparents. And what blew our minds and was just this awesome experience for me was that it named other family members that were here in the United States and overseas. And my mother was freaking out because she did not know that her grandparents had siblings that survived the genocide. Because while they had come here, a lot of their family was still over in Turkey and weren't heard from. And so my mother always assumed that almost all these people had been killed, and surprised to find from these obituaries that people had survived. My great-grandfather, Charles Highanoush, which was actually an alias name, his name was Arshavir Gujikyan, had a brother, Garibed Gujikyan, in St. Louis, and another brother, Arsham Gujikyan, in Syria. My great-mother, Sirapi, had two brothers living in Worcester, Massachusetts. And we didn't know that, my mother did not know that her grandparents had siblings that were living here. They died when she was young, and I never knew them. They died, decades before I was born. So it was just this awesome revelation to us. In the next slide, you'll see obituaries for my grandmother on the other side of the family. This is my mother's mother's mother. And it's the same thing. The obituary on the left showed that she had a sister living in Massachusetts. And the obituary on the other side is for the same woman. It's my great-grandmother. But it was published in a different paper. And so it had different information. It listed a Jacob Highanoush and a George Highanoush, and Highanoush was her maiden name, that were pallbearers at her service. And it didn't say what the relationship was, and we didn't know who they were, but obviously they related. They were at her funeral, they were her pallbearers, and they had the same name as her maiden name. So this was my quest, is okay, there are other people that were here in the United States, and we have to find these people. In the next photo, I immediately went to Family Search. It was the only genealogy site I was really familiar with at the time, and it was free. So I typed in the name Joseph Highanoush, And one of the records that came up, this very next one, was a census record for a Jacob Highanoush, and in the house was a George Highanoush and a Joseph Highanoush. These are the names of the pallbearers that were at my grandmother's or my great-grandmother's funeral. And it listed this whole family, and the dates and or the ages, in the rank order of the children, Jacob, and then wife Lucy, and then Sophie and Hazel and George and Leo and Mary and Joseph. It was going through, it looked very much like it could possibly be this photo, this next photo of the family, the one that had just captured the ages and there were just the ranking and sex of the children. I thought, this has to be this family. So then my search continued, trying to find obituaries. Okay, these people, Joseph and George Highanoush, who are they? And how are they related to my great-grandparents? So I started searching for more, and the next slide shows the obituary for Joseph Highanoush. And it named Mary Catherine and Catherine Mary as daughters. And this was a 2011 obituary, if I remember correctly. So these people were probably alive, Mary Catherine and Catherine Mary. They might be Catholic. So I was so super excited about this, and I kept searching for other names as well that I was seeing in the obituaries. The next one shows an obituary for George Kevorkian, who was another person named in one of the obituaries, and it named all these other people too. Florence Peshoen, Isabel Thompson, Catherine Yarmian, all these people who might still be living or may not be, but these are more names that I could search. And my thing was, I have to find the living people, because they might be able to tell me who these people are in these photographs, because nothing on Ancestry, unless somebody already put these pictures up, is going to tell me who these people are. So I wanted to find living people. So I just kept digging and digging. The next photograph shows, I actually found the tombstone of my great-grandparents. Now, I have never been there. I've never seen this tombstone. My mother never saw this tombstone. And at the bottom, you can see my family name, Grchikian, in Armenian. This was the first time I'd ever seen, or my mom had ever even seen, what the family name looked like in her native language of Armenian. So that was just completely fascinating to me. But one of the things I started using was databases, like online phone books. The next slide shows white pages. There's white pages, there's truepeoplesearch.com, there's logos, there's several different, it's essentially like the yellow pages or white pages rather, on the internet. So I started typing in the names of all these people who I thought might still be living, who might be able to connect me to the names of the people in these photographs. And the thing is, you can click on these, and very often it will give you their phone number and their address. It's a little creepy, because if you type your name in on these things, you might come up. So it can be a little creepy because but it really, if you think about it, it's not any different than the phone books that we've had, for generations. But yeah, I found lots of names and phone numbers, and I just started writing it all down. I was making a big list of all the contacts that I needed to write to or make a phone call to. Another trick I did, in the next slide, I just used Google search. I just typed people's names in the Google search to see if I could find anything. So Mary Highanoush was listed as one of the pallbearer's daughters in his obituary. I typed her name in Google search, and that very first one came up and said Mary Highanoush, office coordinator at Suffolk University in Boston. And I knew the family was in Boston because that's what the census record showed, or in the Boston area, and I thought, this might be her. So I clicked on that link, and it gave me her work email address. So I wrote to her at her work email address, and I apologize. this probably has nothing to do with your job. This has to do with Hainoushian genealogy. But, and then I wrote this big long email, and it was only 2 days later, I got a phone call. And she said, "Is this Tracy Keeney?" I said, "Yes, it is." And she said, "I got an email from you about Hainoushian genealogy." And I was like, "Yes." And she goes, "And you sent a picture of a family?" I was like, "Yes." And she said, "The little boy on the right in that photograph is my dad. That picture has been, yeah, that picture has been hanging over my father's couch since I was a little girl. And it's hanging in my basement right now." And I was dying. I was dying. That was her dad in that photograph. But she didn't know how they were related to us. She didn't know about us, and we didn't know about her. So she didn't know how we were related either. But we both had the same photograph. Mine from my grandmother's closet, and her because she grew up with that photo in her house. The next photo, or the next slide. So I went on YouTube. I have teenagers who like to make YouTube videos and put things up on YouTube. And I knew that you could find people on YouTube. So I typed in one of the many spellings of the Grudjikian last name that I had found in my research. And I typed it in, and I found this YouTube video for Dennis Grudjikian. And when I clicked it, you can see it's him and his little pig. He has a pet pig. And he has several videos of him and his little pet pig. So I went down in the comments section and wrote a note. "My name is Tracy Keeney. I'm trying to figure out my Grudjikian genealogy. Your last name is one of the spellings that I found in census records and in ship manifests. Do you know anything about your family history? I think we might be related. I'd love to hear from you." A couple days later, I heard back. I gave them my email address. A couple days later, I heard back from him. Their family was from the same village, Kihei, in Turkey. And even the name Grudjikian, even among Armenians, is not a common name. So he's from the same village. It's the same family name. We're related somehow. He didn't know how we were related. I didn't know how we were related, but I have a contact. And so, I just kept crossing my fingers that eventually we'd find something. Oops, I'm just realizing here that I haven't been keeping up on slides. Okay, the next thing I started doing. So here, what I'm doing right now, I'm just trying to get as many names and contacts for people as I can, because I want to be able to send them photographs. I want to send them the information we have, and maybe we can figure out these relations. I started searching the different spellings of my family names on Facebook. Found tons of people, and look where some of these people are. Aleppo, Syria. That's where my great-grandfather's brother, according to his obituary, he had a brother living in Aleppo, Syria. And now I'm seeing Grudjikians in Aleppo, Syria. So I contacted all these people through Facebook. Again, their family came originally from Kegi, Turkey. They have the same name. We're probably related, but we didn't know how. But we can start working on it together. The next slide. One of the things I discovered, and if you're on Facebook and you don't know about this, this may be a goldmine for you. When you first open up your messages on Facebook, the messages you're seeing are the ones that are listed under recent. If you look to the left of the red circle, when you open up your messages on Facebook, you're seeing messages that are in the recent photo or in the recent folder, and they are from your friends. They're coming from people that you already know and that you're already friends with on Facebook. But next to it, in a lighter text, is message requests. This is a different folder, and these messages will not show up in your regular messages. The message request folder are messages from people that you're not friends with on Facebook. And so when you open that up, you may find that you have messages from people who've been trying to get in contact with you. In my case, I was sending people messages, but they weren't seeing them because they didn't know about this message request folder. You only will see what's in it if you click on it. It's like a subfolder, and a lot of people don't know that it's there. And I have sent messages to people and didn't hear from them for 3 or 4 years. But then they discover this folder, they find it, and they're replying back to me, I'm so sorry, I just saw this message, and it's like from 2014. But that's actually happened several times. Now, the thing about this folder, you might have messages from people who are trying to contact you about genealogy. You might have someone trying to sell you Tupperware. So some of it's going to be junk, and you'll want to get rid of it. But I just want to make sure that you know about this folder, because like I said, I've sent people messages that they didn't see until like 3 or 4 years later, but I have made family connections through that folder. So once I had this, there we go. Yes, once I had my list of all these names and addresses, I wrote a letter. And in the letter, I included, copies. I just copied it onto regular paper on my computer, of some of these photographs, and I explained to them the research I had done, the names I had found in census records. You can see in the bottom right-hand corner of my letter, I included the obituary for my great-grandparents, because one of the things I was worried about was that they're going to get this letter from somebody and they might think it's a scam. I'm just trying to get their money or whatever. There's so many scams these days. I wanted these people to know I was serious. And so I gave them all the information that I'd found. I included my information. You can see down in the bottom there, I gave them every way possible to contact with me. I gave them my phone number, my house number, I gave them my cell number, I gave them my email address, I gave them my home address, I gave them, how they could find me on Facebook. I gave them every way possible. And I told them also, if you don't know anything about your family history, if you don't know who these people are, please give my letter and these photos to someone else in your family who you think might. If you have some aunt who's like knows the family history, please give her my letter, because they might be my only hope in finding out who these people are. So I sent out 97 letters, just on the Highanoush side of the family. And I don't remember how many there were on the Truckee side. I just remembered this was my first. This letter was one of my first ones. It actually was my first one, I think, if I remember correctly. And I just remembered that this, just for the Highanoush family, I sent out 97 letters because I found every Highanoush and their children and their daughters whose names were changed because they got married, and I sent it to everybody I could. So I spent a little bit on postage, but I kind of was figuring, like, this is the only way I'm going to be able to figure this out, because there's just no other way to do it. Somebody has to recognize these people. And so I included the pictures, and maybe you can help me figure out how these people are related to my family. The response I got, I sent out 97 letters. I think I probably got 5 or 6 phone calls originally, and then as time went on, I probably don't think I got any more than 7 or 8 phone calls from people. And I did get 2 letters. I'm wrong. I got 3. And I'm going to show you, if you look at the next slide, this was the response I got. I got this big tree. It was huge. It went back to 1820, I figured, just guessing their guessing by, if you assume that they were 20 years old when they got married and had a baby 2 years later, that kind of thing. I was guessing this went back to about 1820, and which is huge for Armenian genealogy because most people can't get past 1915, and so this was huge. Next to it was a letter that I got from a woman who was 101 years old. She was born the year before the genocide happened. And she, amazingly, her name was Florence Pashoyan. She was one of the people listed in one of the obituaries. She was able to identify everyone in the photos. Every photo. And so that just saved everything. And it turned out that the woman or the man in that family photo with that beautiful family was my great-grandmother's brother, Jacob Highanoush. And George and Joseph, the pallbearers, were her nephews. And that was just one sibling. She had two other siblings that had also come to the United States. The next slide shows another family tree that I got. A very extensive family tree. And included with the family tree was a photograph of my great-grandparents. I had never seen a picture of my great-grandparents before. My mom didn't have one. And so that couple standing in the back there is Arshavir Gajikyan and his wife, my great-grandmother Serapi, and his brother Garabed, and his wife, his daughter, and my grandfather's sister Maklui sitting down in the back there. So again, I got the two big family trees. I've got photographs identified. I'm getting photographs of my own great-grandparents that I had never seen before. And here's something that's one of the clinching parts of this story. The gentleman who sent me this tree told me that it was my great-grandfather, Arshavir, the man standing in the back, who wrote out this family tree. It did not come down through his family. They were at a family picnic back in 1948, and he drew out the family tree for everyone and gave copies to the cousins. One of the cousins' great-grandson is the guy who sent me the tree. So my great-grandfather wrote out the tree, handed it out to people. One of his cousins, handed it to his grandson, who gave it to me in 2013. That tree was made in 1948. But it didn't come down through our line of the family, which is a tragedy. And it makes me want to, what was wrong with my grandparents that they didn't make sure it got it? I'm going to have a big conversation with some people when I get up to heaven. So if I get there. But, it was just one of these things. And this is exactly what I was talking about. That family tree that I showed you a picture of that shows your relationship to these other people. I've gotten so much information from distant cousins. This is a fifth cousin once removed who sent me this tree. Or fourth cousin, sorry. Fourth cousin once removed who sent me this tree. And it's when someone reaches out to you through Ancestry or something like that, and you see fourth cousin, yeah, it's a little bit too far. It's far, yeah. But if you share the same third great-grandparent, they might have pictures of your third great-grandparents. They might have pictures of your own like this. He had a picture of my great-grandfather that I didn't have. My mother didn't have one photo of her grandparents. And I got it from a fourth cousin once removed. So it's just never, ever, ever, brush aside a distant relation. The next photo is another family tree that I got in the mail. This was my great-grandmother Samuelian's family tree, sent to me by one of her brother's son's son. I had to think of that. But again, a lot of information here about this goes back to my third great-grandfather. And the only name we had was my great-grandmother, and this goes back to her second great-grandfather, if I'm thinking of that correctly. And I was also able to get pictures of him as well. And so again, the amount of information I got just from writing to people whose names I found in obituaries and stuff landed me a gold mine. When I began this, I knew the names of my great-grandparents and their village, and that's it. And now I have, this tree, and I've got, now I think I have 570 something names, which is huge. That's a huge thing in Armenian genealogy. It's nothing for, for people who've had, family in the United States, settling the colonies, but it's huge in Armenian genealogy. And I found most of this from just finding obituaries and contacting people, because this stuff, all the information that's been on all the trees I've shown you so far, none of it was on Family Search or Facebook or Ancestry. None of it was. I got all this information from living people because someone in the family was the family historian and had it written down. And you can see this one was written in 1996. They just still had a copy of it and they sent it to me in 2013. The next slide. The other thing I did is one of the obituaries, said that my great-grandfather had a brother, Arsham, living in Aleppo, Syria. So I got on Facebook and I was like, what are the chances that I can find, because I was looking online for how can I contact a church in Aleppo, Syria? Couldn't find a way to do it. But you know what? My church has a Facebook page. And I thought, what are the chances if the Armenian church in Aleppo, Syria has a Facebook page? So I got on Facebook and I found 2 Facebook pages for Armenian churches in Aleppo, Syria. So I sent them a private message and I said, my name is Tracy Keeney. I'm doing genealogy research for the Grajikian family. And I'm typing all this in English, not knowing if anybody's going to be able to read it. And, but of course they could, because everybody learns English everywhere. And I got a response back, and there's Grajikians in that church. And they put me in contact with them, and we were able to write back and forth and, start working on putting our trees together and figuring out, if we're related, and if it was through my great-grandfather's brother or not. The next slide shows, let's see here, I just realized I started a Facebook page for my family. So I have one for the Highanoush, Kashabjian, Palazezian side, and I have one for the Grajikian side and the Samuelian side. And I only invite the people that I know about. It's not a public group, it's a closed group. And I invite them to the group and I tell them, now go ahead and invite your cousin, go ahead and invite, your aunt or whoever, anybody that has any connection to our family, because we can start working together to put our tree together. The next slide shows you some of the success that we've had. I got 2 more family trees and more family pictures. And the really cool thing is I got recipes. Okay, so that recipe for Sharkarsi cookies, which I took a picture of there, was by one of my cousins, Grandma Rose, who was my great-grandmother's sister. And she said that was a family recipe that they knew was their mother's picture. So that's my 2 times great-grandmother's recipe for cookies. It was so cool. And so that's what I made those for Christmas this year. In the Facebook, I really promote using Facebook for doing genealogy because it's so fast. It's immediate. Sending a letter, talking on the phone is great. But email is great, but Facebook is much, much more immediate. And it's just, I love it. On the same Facebook group, if you go to the next slide, this is incredible. This is, another distant cousin, I think he's a 4th cousin as well, posted this picture that his mother drew. She survived the genocide. It's an amazing, dreadful story, but just amazing that she survived. When she got to the United States, which is about 3 years later, she was 15 when she got to the United States. And she wrote out a map of her village and where they lived and who lived in the different houses, because she thought that eventually one day she was going to get to go back home. And she was afraid that by the time she got there, she might not remember how to find her house. So she drew out this map and labeled where everybody lived. But one of the other things she did, and it might be hard for you to read, it's not very, it's broken English, and it's, but she drew out her escape route and where she was hiding as the Turkish soldiers were coming through the village. And they had gone through the village a week before and taken away everybody's weapons so that they couldn't fight back, right? They took their weapons, their swords, their guns, whatever. And then they came back through, gathered all the men, and I have this from her personal history now. Gathered all the men, took them behind the Armenian church, shot them, went back, grabbed the women, separated the adult women from the children. But this little girl had gotten away, and she was hiding, and this is what she drew. As she was hiding, she'd go into one house and hide here, and then she could hear the soldiers coming, and she'd run, and she's drawing in her little escape route there, like how she ran from one house to the other, and then she went and hid, and it's just a fascinating thing, just absolutely fascinating. The really cool thing, when you look at the next slide, is if this is a drawing from a map of the same city, and on the map that she drew, she wrote that St. Girigos Church was up her street, and the city gate was at the other end of the street, and she showed where her house was, and that area circled in yellow is what I thought must be the couple of, the rows of houses that she drew, because up that street is the St. Girigos Church, and down the street was the city gate. And I thought, this must be the area that she drew. This must be her neighborhood. So I went on Google Maps or Google Earth, and the next slide, you can see the city wall. The city of Diyarbakir is a walled city, very much like what you see in the movies, with the big tall walls that go all the way around the city, and the guards would be up on top to fight off any danger. And this is her street, and the churches are even labeled, and you can see where the streets used to be. So the right side of that main street, where it's mostly now empty, was the Armenian section of town. On the other side was the Turkish section of town, and you can see what's happened to the Armenian side. It's mostly not there anymore. But yeah, I can pretty much say for certainty what the street was. You can see where the road used to be, because it's a pretty worn path. But I can pretty much nail down where my great-grandmother's house was, because the churches are still labeled on that map. The next photo, or the next slide, I keep wanting to say photo. I typed in the name of one of the people on the trees. I did this with everybody. Every name that was on the trees that I got sent, I just typed in Google search. I mean, I searched, ancestry and family search. I did what I could to try to find, genealogical records. But a lot of times there just wasn't anything there, other than maybe a death record, This woman happened to die in Detroit, Michigan. And I knew that much. But, is there anything else I could find? So I just typed her name in Google. And the first thing that popped up, there were only 8 results, but the first one was interviews with genocide survivors. So I clicked on it, and it took me to the website for Michigan Dearborn, the campus at Dearborn for the University of Michigan. And they had recorded what it was, the people who had survived the genocide were dying out. And they's like, we need to get their stories recorded before these people pass away. Once they pass away, their information is going to go with them. We need to record it. So I think it was in the 70s and 80s, they started recording all the, interviews from people who had survived the genocide. And I could listen to it online and read along with an English translation, because it was done she spoke Armenian and Turkish. She spoke both. And on the next slide, you can see the transcript. It was a 12-page transcript of an interview. And, you know, reading through this was very difficult reading. What they suffered was absolutely horrendous. And one of the things I've learned as I've been researching is I was just shocked by this, but a lot of Hitler's strategies in making this genocide happen against the Jews, he took from the Armenian genocide. He actually says it in his writings. One of the quotes, most famously quoted, you know, to Armenians anyway, is, you know, after all, who remembers what happened to the Armenians? Because over time, you know, people forgot about it. It isn't even talked about in a lot of schools, you know, here in America today. The Holocaust gets talked about a lot, but the genocide of the Armenians is actually what inspired Hitler, that he would be able to do it and get away with it, because the Ottoman Turks had gotten away with it with the Armenians, and it was actually Assyrians and Greeks too. It was really, honestly, it was anyone who was Christian is what it was. It just so happened that the Armenians were the bulk of that group. So I don't mean to slight what happened to the Assyrians or the Greeks either, but I was able to read through this 12-page thing, which had so much genealogical information in it. She named all her brothers and sisters. She named her parents. She named other people, you know, in the neighborhood. She, you know, that her grandmother lived in the house next door, and there was all this information, and it was really neat stuff too. Family stories. She talked about tricks she played on her brother. You know, how she broke something and she blamed it on her brother, and they were playing on the roof one time and she pushed him and he fell off and he broke his foot, you know, and she's telling all these stories, you know, on top of, you know, the really dreadful things that she talked about and the things that she endured. I also learned an awful lot about just the culture, the everyday life of what it would be like living in, you know, like a pre-World War I Armenian village in Ottoman Turkey. I mean, it was fascinating. And I actually have 3 of these interviews now for different relatives, different ancestors on my tree. It's wealth of information. But again, I found this just by typing her name in a Google search. That's it. It was that fast. It took like 12 seconds. It was amazing. And this next slide is actually a picture of Highanoush. She's the woman in the middle. She originally, when she survived, she ended up in Marseille, France, which is where a lot of Armenians ended up. And that's her as an older woman on the right there at her son's wedding. The next photo, the next slide, another instance where I found fantastic information just from typing a name in the Google search. So the wife in that one photo of that beautiful photo of the Hanouchian family with all the children. This is my great-grandmother's brother's wife, Lucy. She died in 1940, and her granddaughter, who I did find, her granddaughter is the one who said that they had the picture in her house. And when I was talking with them, they didn't know how Lucy died. The family rumor was that she'd been killed because she was testifying in the murder trial of an Armenian priest who was killed on Christmas Eve as he was walking up the church aisle for Christmas Mass. Men came in, shot him right in front of everybody. And there was this big murder trial. Well, all Katie knew was that her grandmother died when she went to go testify in a trial, but they didn't know what the trial was. They didn't know why she was testifying. All they knew is that she died when she went to go testify in a murder trial, but they didn't know what the trial was or who had been killed or anything. And I found it. I typed her name in, and I assumed that there would at least be newspaper stories or something that I could find in archives, but just typing in her name in a Google search brought up the court case. I was able to read the entire court case. And it was fascinating because the family rumor that she was killed to stop her from testifying in the trial seems like it's pretty legitimate. There were 4 other people who were supposed to testify in that trial who all died. A man, one of the guys who was supposed to testify, was found burned to death. His body was found next to the Boston River. One of the guy's sons was kidnapped. I mean, all sorts of crazy stuff went happen. And this was something that she never knew about, and she wanted to know about. It was sad to hear about, of course. It was tragic to hear about. But she never knew about this stuff, and I found it just by typing her grandmother's name in a search engine. Just the amount of information you can find just from a Google search can sometimes just blow you away. It's just mind-boggling. The next slide. This is when I started getting into more archival stuff. The National Archives, one of the blessings of living in Kansas City is that we have a branch of the National Archives here. And the National Archives in Kansas City and in San Francisco have been designated as the housing places for alien files. And alien files are similar to citizenship files that you can get from USCIS, but they often contain a lot more information. Pretty much anytime someone was trying to become a citizen and had any dealings they had with the government, because they just didn't have enough paperwork, they couldn't find their birth certificate or whatever, they had all these exchanges, the information would go into an alien file if they weren't yet a citizen. And so I've been able to go to the National Archives here in Kansas City and photograph hundreds of alien files for Armenians, and some of them were for my family members. So the next slide will show you what, when you search the National Archives database, this is what it will look like. It will say alien file for. All you have to do is type in their name, and if there's an alien file for that person that's been, what's the word I'm looking for? That's been brought together, because the files, the paperwork came from banks, it came from insurance agencies, it came from, from their immigration paperwork. It was anything where they were trying to prove who they were, that they were going to be a good citizen and weren't going to be a drain on the, on the government or whatever, that they weren't a criminal, that they weren't practicing polygamy, anything like that, that they needed to prove that they were going to be a good citizen and prove who they were, would potentially end up in this file, but it was in different places, in different offices around the country. Once those files got condensed and put together, then it's called an alien case file, and the ones that have been put together have been sent to Kansas City or San Francisco. And the next slides just show some of the information, just wealth of information, stuff that is not available on, and you can't get it unless you get their alien file. It's not going to be on Ancestry. It's not going to be on Family Search. So, but her birth certificate's on here. She had written a letter all about her family members that were here in the United States. So now I had more information for my family tree. That letter talks about her brothers and sisters and where they were living and where they were located. This woman had been she originally went to the United Kingdom, and she was flying she was a pilot in their Air Force. I was like, really? Okay. Just blew my mind, and then she ended up coming to the United States. The next slide shows more of the documents that were in her file. Again, things that are not going to show up on Ancestry or Family Search. You can see her, some of her paperwork there that's written in, I think, if I remember right, that's Ottoman script. It's not Arabic. If I remember right, it's Ottoman script. But just fascinating information can be found in alien files. Sometimes I've photographed alien files that have hundreds of pages in them. So some of them might only have 4 or 5 pages, but I've photographed some that have hundreds of pages. They can be a wealth of information. So I highly recommend, if you get on if you have any relatives that came from out of the country, that were immigrants, to get on the on the National Archives website and see if you can find an alien file for them. The next slide. One of the things that occurred to me as I was doing this research is that, I'm looking at all these English records, and what if there's Armenian records? I don't know how to speak Armenian. there have to be some records out there that I just don't know about. I'm finding a lot of this stuff online in English, but what if there's records out there that are in Armenian and I'm searching for it in English? I'm not going to be able to find it. So I got on Google Translate. Google Translate is a wonderful tool. I just typed in Armenian orphan camps. There were over 600,000 orphans after the genocide. And I knew there were some on my tree that they were either killed or they died in the desert as they're being marched out of Turkey, or they were put in orphanages, but they were never heard from again. Like when my great-grandfather went back, it took him 4 years to find his wife and daughter. They'd been displaced. They weren't even in Turkey anymore, but he didn't know where they were. And this happened over and over and over again. And so I had people in my tree that we assumed might have ended up in orphan camps. And I was wondering, well, did they have intake papers? Maybe we can find them on a list of Armenian orphans somewhere. And so I typed in Armenian orphan camps, and then I copied the Armenian and pasted that in Google search. And I ended up finding records for that. The next slide, took me to a website in French for Armenian. There were a lot of Armenian camps, refugee camps and orphanages set up in France. And the records, they do have some records. And this particular photo is showing a list of baptismal certificates from the Armenian churches in France. But I found records for my great-grandfather's brother's children's baptisms here on this website. This is a website specifically for Armenians in France, is what that is. And so that was invaluable information. The next slide shows, it's called Gallica, and this would be beneficial for anyone, in your class there that have French ancestry. This is the French National Library. And immigration paperwork is some of the stuff that's there. And so I typed in, this is the French, the French spelling of Grytjikian in the Latin alphabet. So one of the reasons why there's a trillion spellings for Grytjikian is because they went to different countries and, as part of the diaspora, and they tried to spell their name in the language using the phonetics of the country they were living in. So Grytjikian became Giurdjikian, which is completely different than the way my family spelled it. But I found information here that middle document there is my great-grandfather's cousin, Highanoush, who was on the family tree. And it names his wife, it names his children, it gives their birth dates. Something that was not on my family tree. My family tree that ended up coming down from my great-grandfather only had names. And it didn't have the names of any of the daughter's children. Very patriarchal. It was a very patriarchal tree. It had the fathers and their children and the children of their sons. But none of the wives are listed. And none of the children of the daughters are listed. So a lot of my research had to be on the women's side of the tree. But this document for Highanoush named his wife and his children and gave their birth dates. And I found several other things on the website. But again, that's because I used Google Translate. I translated things into French. I translated things into Armenian. I translated things into Arabic because of Aleppo, because of the connections in Aleppo, Syria. I've used Google Translate over and over and over again. So I can search in the language of the country where I'm looking. If you search for it in English, you're not going to find it. But you search for it in the language of the country that you're looking for, then you can possibly find some records. The next slide. Oh, this is Highanoush and his family, and I got this picture because one of the trees that I was sent to me by another one of my great-grandfather's cousins who had a lot of family photographs. So I got even more family photographs than what was on the, in that box that came from my grandmother's closet. The next photo is I was looking for immigrants that went to Romania. So another one of the countries that took in a lot of the Armenian immigrants after the genocide was Romania. And someone had asked me, I had started a Facebook group for Armenian genealogy, and does anybody have any information about Armenians in Romania? Well, at the time, I didn't even know that there were any Armenians that had gone to Romania. I didn't know anything about documents for Armenians there. So I used Google Translate to search for Armenian immigrants in Romania. And the next slide shows what I found. It's incredible. This is the Romanian version of Ancestry. And there's a whole bunch of stuff all about Armenians there. The next slide shows you can see it's similar to, like I said, to Ancestry. There's newspaper clippings and lists of their businesses and just fantastic stuff that I never would have known about if I hadn't used Google Search or Google Translate to search for it. Excuse me while I get a glass of water here. What time is it? How are we doing here?
Oh, we're doing good.
Okay. So the next slide, one of the things that I'm really, really happy about is that in this process, the Facebook group that I started, I've been able to link with other people who I didn't know at the time had been working on this is from Mark Arslan. He started the Armenian Immigration Project. This is before Ancestry came out. His only source, he started this 30 years ago, and his only source at the time was Family Search. And he was going to LDS Church family history libraries, and at the time when everything was just microfiche, this is a guy who was just trying to find his Armenian ancestry. Just so happens that his family came from the same village that my great-grandfather did. And he started off just looking for Armenian immigrants from the village of Kegi. And he was literally going through every page, over 30 years, going through every page of the passenger manifests for the ships coming into Ellis and Castle Garden for anyone coming from Kegi. And it started off with just village of Kegi, but as he was going on, it just built and built and built, and it became any Armenian coming to the United States. And this is what's fascinating, because I have this group now of almost 12,000 people around the world. I mean, they're in like every country that are diaspora Armenians, and they speak languages, in all their different host countries. They can read in those languages, they can speak in those languages, and thankfully a lot of them can still speak and read Armenian. And so we've been able to use our group like an online family search. The members of our group all work together to translate and index records, and it's all Armenian based. So we just have, and it's all volunteer. It's just people all working together to help translate records. It's been an amazing, amazing work. The next slide shows one of the awesome things about the way he's done this. He used to work for IBM, so he's a computer programmer. And he has tools that Ancestry and Family Search don't have. It's amazing what he's done with this project. If Ancestry needs to do this, I say, Mark, you need to call Ancestry and teach them a thing or two. You can search his database by the last name, by where they were going. He used the ship manifests and took all the information from the ship manifest, and you can search it by pretty much anything. So you can go into this database and you can search by last name. You can search by the last residence. One of the things that is on the ship manifest is where they left, where they're coming from. Where's the last place you lived? Well, if your if the last place your great-grandfather lived was in Kegi, Turkey, you might be able to find a lot of information about relatives coming from Kegi, Turkey, if you could only search it that way. You might not know their names, but you can search his database by where they came from. You can search it by the origin point. You can search it by who they were going to stay with in the United States, which is another column that was listed on the ship manifest. Another very helpful one is the address they were going to. It was very, very common. The immigrants would come over, and then their cousins would start coming over. Their grandparents would start coming in, and they all go to stay with Uncle John, right, in Boston, Massachusetts, or whatever. And so that address is listed there. You can search his database by address. And so I can tell you, like, over and over and over again, Armenian family was coming over. People who survived were coming over and going to 208 Solvoy Street in Detroit, Michigan, if they were Grudjikian, because that's where a family member was. There was a contact there for them. And so even if their names got misspelled on documents, I can search by address, and then all the spellings come up. And I just, like, if you look at the next page, this is only a partial list of the spellings of Grudjikian. Part of the craziness is you can see a real Armenian spelling on the left on the blue portion of the page. They're trying to spell their name using English or French or whatever phonics. How do you spell gur? Well, the first two Armenian letters GR. But if you're Armenian and you're trying to spell gur, well, that could be GUR, that could be GIR, that could be, GER, Gurjejian, J, G, the Gurjikian, the last sign kind of has a G-ish, K-ish kind of sound. So some people spelled it with a K, some people spelled it with a G, some people used a J instead of a G. I mean, there's just all these crazy spellings. And then you add in the French phonics, right? I mean, there's just all these crazy different, every name you see there is a spelling that I found. And I did add some that I wanted to search just in case, so I did add some too. But a lot of crazy spellings going on here. And the crazy thing is they didn't use the same spelling when they came. My grandfather spelled his name one way. His own brother spelled it a different way. I mean, you'd think they would have just taken a vote, made a consensus, and let's just all spell it the same way. But they didn't do that. That's another conversation I'm going to have with some people when I see them. They did not do me any favors. But yeah, so lots of crazy spellings. And you can see in the next slide, you can search this Armenian genealogy database by a standardized name. So when I type in one spelling, all the other spellings, because Mark knows, he knows Armenian, so he can see a spelling of a name and say, oh, that's another spelling for Grudjikian. So he puts them all in there, and all the different spellings come up, even if they're crazy different, they come up because he knows the phonics and he knows what they're trying to spell. And so it's just an amazing resource, and it's something I'm really, really hoping. I've written to Family Search and Ancestry, and I think a couple other people in the genealogy group have said, you guys need to add this programming because it's such a help. The next slide, oops. This is what an indexed ship record looks like in the Armenian group. For the most part, the ship manifests do not get fully indexed. Their name will be there. I think maybe their place of birth is there, the kind of thing. But in the Armenian genealogy database, the whole record is there. So that's really helpful. And then he adds their photograph. If you have a photograph of them, he'll add their photograph in there for you as well. So when someone pulls it up, it'll pull up their ship manifest. And then there's another page as you keep scrolling down. Any other records for that same person that he has in the database will come up. And this next page shows you how you can, this is the searching by address. So these are all people who ended up on Cabot Street. These are all the Grijigians, or people who went to live or stay with the Grijigians at 244 Cabot Street in Turkey, or in Boston. But something else, you can't search ancestry that way, so that's really helpful. Something else that's on there that's been really helpful is search ads. The next slide shows search ads. It was very common in the first, 5-10 years after the genocide. The Armenian newspapers all across the country, mostly New York, Boston, Detroit, and LA, had search ads, people trying to find their family. This was an ad, they were looking for the Sarabians, who I now know are related on my great-grandmother's side. So this was my grandfather, my great-grandfather, Arshavir, put this ad in one of the Armenian newspapers, trying to find members of his wife's family. And this is only one of his, I think he had 4 ads in the paper. But you can search, but this is one of the extra databases that are in the Armenian Immigration Project. And like I said, one of the really awesome things is, like, I don't know Armenian, and Mark, who's been doing all this research, doesn't know Armenian. But we have members of the group all over the country who know Armenian. And so members of the group are the ones who do this. Mark sends them, digital photographs of the newspapers, and they translate the ads, and then he can add them to his database. So we really have our own ancestry going on just for Armenians, and it's been incredible. So this is a photo of the Facebook genealogy, the genealogy page for the Armenian Facebook group. And it's a closed group, but there's almost 12,000 people. I think there's like 11,500, something like that in the group now. And we use it as an online office. And I would encourage anyone to do the same thing, whether you do it on a family level, whether you do it on a city level. If you know that your family was living in a little rural town in Kansas somewhere, you can start a genealogy page for that rural town. And especially, the further back you go in time, the greater the chances that a lot of the people in that town were all related. And it's one of the things that's absolutely true with Armenians is, pretty much everyone in the village of Kigi was related. They just stayed in their little family, commune kinds of things. And so the Facebook groups have been so successful and have been so, so helpful in every aspect with every line of my family, because people can get on and communicate, and you've got 5 or 6 people all looking at the same photograph, talking in live time. Is that grandpa so-and-so? Oh yeah, that is. And who's that guy to the right? Oh, wasn't that his cousin? Oh yeah, or whatever. And they're all just talking, and like I said, sharing recipes, sharing family trees, answering questions. Just it's the best way to go. If you can't be all together in the same room in live person, there just isn't a better way to do it than through Facebook. So the next slide shows we have this huge, this is only one page, file database, even in the Facebook group, of all these records that we work on. We've got some people working on orphan files. We've got some people, indexing all the marriages from a specific church, in a little town in Boston. Or one of the things that we use a lot, or in Armenian, it's called Hushamadian. It's kind of like books written about a specific town. So like if you went to our local library, you could probably find, books, about Reno, books about, little towns. Someone wrote a little history of a little, village or town just outside of Reno, or what used to be there, or the history of some little town outside of Reno. And that's in Armenian, those are called Hushamadian. And a lot of those survived somehow. I'm not sure. They were just found in old churches, or people brought them with them, or somehow a lot of those somehow survived. And so a lot of information is in those books. And so we'll have a person reading a book, and they go through the book and they'll make a family tree from the book. They'll make records of, talking about the businesses that are talked about and who owned, that so-and-so was the town baker and so-and-so was the town jeweler and so-and-so was the town blacksmith or whatever, and any information, and they put it all together and we can upload that to the group. But there's also all the things that we found online. It's just amazing how much stuff, even though the records of the churches were burned, even though you can't get any records, from the Turkish government, there's all sorts of things that you cannot get your hands on. They either don't exist or they're purposely held so that you can't look at them. But there's just amazing stuff that's all over the internet. You just have to find it, and half of it's in another language. If it's not in Armenian, it's in French, or it's a French website with Armenian records, or something like that, and or it's in one of these Hushmadian books. So we have different groups of people working on them, and we upload them to the group. And so some of the things, like this next page, there's a whole book of Armenians, American Armenians who served in World War II. And so people can get on the Facebook group and look through this book and find pictures of their family members. The next one is, this was a list. This was originally written in French. And then we have Armenians in France who translated this for us, and they made it into a document. You can see there are 92 pages of names of Armenians who were living in this one refugee camp. And so people can get on the group, and if they know that their family member ended up in Marseille after the genocide, it's very likely that their family member was in one of these refugee camps. And what's really cool, one of the documents had a photo. It was like a little tent village is what it was. I didn't even know they had those back then, but they had like little tent villages, and it would even say what number tent a family was living in. So you can look at the picture and say, oh my gosh, that's the tent that my family lived in. It's pretty amazing. This next slide shows a book. Someone had a book of graduates of the Euphrates College. And again, all the pictures were in Armenian. So all us, American Armenians looking through it, and we can't read it, but we have people who can translate it. So they went through the book and then went back in, just using, editing software, photo editing or Paint or whatever on their computers, and they added in the English translations of the names. This is an amazing list. So this is a list. A lot of the girls, the younger girls who survived the genocide, were kidnapped and taken into, because they were just death marches through the Syrian desert, and they were. It was annihilation by attrition. If you weren't killed, if you weren't shot and killed, or you weren't put in a cave and gassed or whatever, you died in the desert on your way to Syria. Those who survived were, ended up in refugee camps or orphanages everywhere. But a lot of people, and in all three, this is what's amazing, is just how common it was. In all three of the interviews that some of my ancestors, that were recorded interviews, so all three of them, at least one of the girls and their family was taken. A Turkish soldier would come by on a horse, grab the girl, and just walk off. And they were never heard from again. A lot of them ended up in Turkish homes. And the League of Nations went in after after everything, had settled down and everything. They went in and they were rescuing these girls from these homes. And the really amazing thing is they have these lists if they knew their name, unfortunately, you've got, little ones who didn't know their names or who didn't know their parents' names, or they weren't old enough to speak yet or something. A baby found on the side of the path somewhere, and someone scoops it up and takes it to an orphanage or takes it into their home, and they don't know their names, so they're given names. That was another part of the problem. But you can see in these lists over on the right-hand side, it's once the League of Nations had them, they also kept records of what happened to them afterwards. They were given to relatives, or they were self-supporting, so they just kind of went off on their own, or they were sent to an orphanage under the Near East Relief Society. That's what that NER is. So it's just amazing, these records that we found, but none of them were in English. And so they had to be translated. So we have, again, volunteers in the Armenian genealogy group who just go through these records and translate them and make them accessible through the group. This is another list of orphans. If I remember right, this is a 152-page document for over 600,000 orphans. And they were sent to all sorts of different orphanages all over the world, actually. And this one, you can see, again, if they knew their name, if they knew where they were from, some of them there's question marks. How old they were, if they knew their parents' names, that's on there. If they knew, what village they were from. But then on the far right side of the page, again, a lot of the times their fate was listed in there. Sometimes they died in the orphanage from disease, or, because they were already just so malnourished from the death marches. Or they were sent to another orphanage. What's really heartening is every now and then you're going through these lists and you're seeing all these names of all these children who, were orphaned. But every now and then you come across one and you can see there, third from the bottom, that he was handed to his mother. So at least one child on this page, ended up back with his mother. And this is just, this next one shows you the some of the intake papers. These are all written in Armenian, but it's from a French camp. And so I think this one had, I think there was like somewhere between 600 and 700 children at this one orphanage. But we have people right now that are translating these. And so they'll have a document, the members of the group will have a document they'll be able to look through. They'll be able to, the pictures are numbered. They'll be able to look at the number, read through the, search by name. And hopefully some of the people in the group will be able to find some of those long lost relatives. Sadly, one of the little girls who was known to be missing, this would actually be the little sister of Hamayag, the young man that I found in the French National Archive. His little sister, Ogida, was taken during the death march, and we were hoping to find, because no one ever heard from her again. We were hoping to find that she'd survived somewhere, but we ended up discovering that she died in the orphanage. She was malnourished, and she'd starved and died of thirst, essentially. They just weren't able to save her. So she died in the orphanage. But still, at least now we know her name. We've got her whole name. We've got, because another sister did survive, so the sister was able to give the orphanage all the information. But now we know her, and now we've got her information. She's in my family tree. She's going to be on my family tree as long as it survives through time, and she's not going to be forgotten. And so it's been a difficult process, but it's been a wonderful process. And again, this one of the only thing I can really say, other than using all these different search methods and finding living people, and just using a Google search alone is so powerful. Using Google Translate and searching in other languages, if there's, if you're talking about people coming from other countries. But really, the most important thing, I just can't stress enough, is finding those living people, no matter how distant they might seem. Making contact with living people and being able to share information and trade information, and work together to collaborate and figure out, where we all fit in this, this incredible tapestry of relationships and how we're all tied together. It's been such a rewarding journey for me. And I'm just so happy that I can look at these pictures now. I can tell you the names of every single one of those people, and I know exactly where they are in my tree. And the amazing thing is, is through this process, I've become so close with some of these living people. I talk to them all the time. I just got sent this traditional Armenian candy called rojik that my great grandmother's brother, it is something that was in our family. The family name was actually Palazizyan, but they changed it to Anushian because they were candy makers, and Anush means sweets or candies. And so they changed their family name to Anushian. And one of the things that our family was known for, I didn't know anything about this until I found these living relatives, was this candy called rojik. And one of my cousins just sent me some. I've got it in my refrigerator now, but it's kind of like the outside of it is kind of like fruit leather, but it's filled with, nuts, pistachios and pecans and almonds and stuff, and they roll it up, and I've got some in my refrigerator now. But I've made amazing relationships with these people, and we've been able to do so much to figure out our trees and how we're all connected. And it really is just amazing how quickly that connection happens. I've just been blown away by how quickly we've been able to build relationships with these people that until 2013, we just didn't even know they existed. My mom thought for the longest time that her parents, her great-grandparents, were the only people in the family that survived the genocide, and that just wasn't true. There's a lot of people, and their descendants, really, we flourished. There was an attempt to annihilate an entire culture, and it just didn't happen because the survivors have continued on, and there's this huge, gigantic Armenian family tree that is flourishing and thriving. And hopefully, as technology continues to improve and records become more and more available, we'll find out even more. But the awesome thing is that it's preserved. And the thing about finding living relatives, to me, is more important than finding the records that are like the ancestry kind of stuff, the stuff that's on Ancestry. I push to people so often, find the living relatives. The stuff that's on Ancestry is going to be on Ancestry. It's still going to be there a year from now, 2 years from now. But Florence Pashoyan, that 101-year-old woman who wrote me that letter in 2013, she died last March. So she's gone now. And if I hadn't found her and gotten that information from her, I don't know that I ever would have known who the people in those photos were, because they weren't labeled. And even if I find names and dates, I have to have a way to connect those names to the faces. And that's through living relatives. And that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't found Florence when I did. She's gone now. The records on Ancestry will be there. The records on Family Search will be there. The Florence Pashoyans won't. So finding the living people and making that connection is, to me, the most important thing. Then work from there and do the research online and gather the names and the dates. But the most important part is the stuff that's in between the dates. Learning about their lives and the family history, to me, that's what makes genealogy really, really meaningful, is learning about these people and their culture and their traditions and their recipes, and in that way, it's like they're not really dead, you know. Their story, their legacy, everything goes on, and it's made my life so much richer, and I'm just so thankful for it. And that's it, I guess.
Well, that was wonderful. Do you mind if I open up the floor to questions?
Oh, absolutely not.
Okay, questions? Yes, go ahead.
You had mentioned that your mom did not know the photograph of her grandparents, but had she ever met them in real life?
Yes, she did. She spent time with them. She remembers going to visit them. She remembers my great-grandfather, her grandfather, very fondly. She just didn't have pictures of him. My mother's 75. She just turned 75, and her grandfather died when she was, let's see, she was born in 44, so he died when she was 11, and she just didn't have pictures. The weird thing is, I don't know why my grandmother didn't have pictures of in the house somewhere. I don't know what that was about, but yeah, it's just these photographs. They were my great grandmother's photographs. Well, the ones from the box. They were my great grandmother's photographs. She died in 1918. No, wait a minute. It was her husband that died in 1918. She died in 1956. And then those photographs went to my grandmother, and they stayed in my grandmother's closet until she died in 1986. And then they went to my uncle's desk for another 17 years. So just travesty. But
Go ahead.
Okay. When you were talking about the alien case files, how far back do those go?
Alien case files didn't start until 1941. Let me see. Can I pull that up really quickly? I don't want to give you incorrect information. And I can send, I didn't think about this, but I have a document that I'd be happy to send to Suzanne that gives all the information for alien files. Let's see here. And who would have one? Because not everybody's going to have one. It depended on whether or not they, let's see. Oh, here we go. I can read some of it to you because it's going to be too.
Are you looking at a slide? Can you tell the number?
I'm sorry?
Are you looking at a slide from the presentation? And if so, would you tell the number? No.
I'm not. I'm pulling up a little chart that I made for the genealogy group. Okay. If the immigrant died before August 1st, 1940, they will not have an alien file or an alien registration number. This has to do when the United States made an act that all aliens had to register. So that's how the alien files got started. So if they died before that act went through in 1940, then there's not going to be an alien file for them. If they became a naturalized citizen between September 27th, 1906 and 1940, they will not have an alien file. If they became a naturalized citizen between August 1st, 1940 and 1956, they may or may not have an alien file. If they immigrated after 1944, they will absolutely have one. If they naturalized on or after 1956, they will absolutely have one. If they registered in the United States as an alien in 1940, but never came back to the Immigration and Naturalization offices for any reason, they were most likely assigned an alien registration number that may not have in file. You have to check with, with the archives. If they registered in the United States as an alien in 1940 and came back to the Immigration and Naturalization Office for any reason, they will have an alien file. And so you can see it's kind of sketchy when there's just all these little different criteria, and it's whether or not they're going to have one or not. Now, one of the interesting things is I've actually become friends with the head archivist over alien files just because I go down to the archives so often to photograph. And that's actually where I heard. That was the first time I heard about these rates going up so crazy. She's the one who told me. And but anyway, she was, one of the amazing things is I'll be looking at alien files, and according to this list, they're not supposed to have an alien file, but there's one there. What's supposed to happen is if they actually became a citizen, their alien file was supposed to be like melded with or added to a citizenship file, or that's called a C file. And those are housed at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. Citizenship files are. So like when you're looking for citizenship papers and you're going through USCIS, that's what that is. That's the citizenship file in Washington, D.C. Alien files only. I don't know. Oh, it's because of the cave. I know they said it's part of the caves. Kansas or Missouri has natural limestone caves, and they just designated the Kansas City branch as one of the ones. It's where actually most of them are being, almost all of them are being sent to Kansas City, but they haven't all been consolidated. The files haven't all been consolidated. So they're not all here. It's like every 2 or 3 years, they get another 100,000 files kind of a thing or something like that. And then San Francisco has files as well, but those are usually for people that came in through the West Coast. So someone who came in through a port in California, their files might be in San Francisco rather than Kansas City. But when you're looking at the alien files, it'll tell you down at the bottom which location it's at. And you can order them through the archives. It's going to cost more money. And like even up until now, I mean, it's the amazing thing is it's different than going through USCIS. That's so much more expensive, and it's like crazy, stupid expensive. Even now it is before prices go up. But you can go into the archives and take pictures of the files for free. I do it all the time. And so I'll go and I'll take pictures. I just have people in the group, hey, look for your family member in the database, the alien file database. And if you find a record, let me know. And the next time I go down there, I'll photograph it for you. So I'll go down there with a list of like 31 names, 35 names or something like that. And it's like a good 7-8 hour day. And I just take pictures, and I take the pictures and I load it right to the Facebook group. And so they can see it like right away, because, instead of having to wait for them to find the file and take a bunch of pictures or, make a bunch of photocopies, which aren't even necessarily always good copies. They're blurry, or, the lighting is off or whatever. How sometimes copies might look black if the lighting is off or whatever. I've gotten some horrible copies from USCIS. But I'm able to take digital photos and send them to them right away, and it doesn't cost a dime, So there you go. If any of you find something in an alien file you'd like me to look, my email address, armeniangenealogy@gmail.com, is in that handout, and you're more than welcome to send it to me. I'd be happy to photograph it for you. So
this is I couldn't have thought of a better example than your presentation on why everyone in this room, if they're so inclined, should go ahead and go on to that website that I talked about at the beginning of class today and voice their opinion. I mean, it doesn't cost a penny to voice your opinion about not wanting the cost to go up over $600 per file.
Crazy, absolutely crazy. And the thing about USCIS, which is just extremely annoying, because I did this with I was trying to find my because my grandfather did become a citizen, and I knew he became a citizen. So I wanted to get the records. I got on the USCIS genealogy website, and it was it cost $28 to do the search, to apply for a search, essentially. You pay $28, you tell them, okay, I'm looking for the citizenship file for Archivir Gujikian. I know he lived at this address, he lived at this address, you know, this is his birth date, this is where he died. I gave them as much information I could so they couldn't say, oh, we couldn't find it, you know. And his other name was Charles O'Hannison. I gave them all the information that I had. It cost me $28. About 8 weeks later, 8 months, I'm sorry, I said weeks, it's not months, as long as it was not weeks. 8 months later, I got a letter saying, hey, we found the file, blah, 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 blah. He does have a file. Go back onto the USCIS genealogy website and now apply to have a record, to get the record sent to you. So they find the record, they know they have it, but they don't send it to you. They just tell you they have it. And then you have to go back online and pay another $28 to have them send it to you. And I waited another 4 months. So it took a year to get that information. Then, and that was like 2014-ish, 2015 maybe. Then the price went up to $65. So then it cost $65 just to make the search and another $65 to get the record. They only, when you make that initial request, they're only searching their database to see if they have a file. If you actually want a copy of the file, you got to pay another $65. It's so obnoxious. So for them to go from that to raising that price to $300-something to $400-something, I'm like, are you going to do that twice? You know, no way, Jose. You know, it's ridiculous. Now, the amazing thing, and what I don't understand is, I mean, you'd think it'd be all the same thing because it's still the archives. For some reason, when you go through USCIS, the price is just exorbitant, and they're making even more so. When you go through the actual National Archives itself, it's nothing like that. You can go to the National Archives, and if they have a file at the National Archives, and they look for it for you, they charge you for the copy, like $2 a copy or something like that, and they charge you for the postage. It's no big deal. Or if you can go in person, you can take pictures of it, and then that's all free. The thing about alien files is that sometimes there might be 100 pages in an alien file. So now you're talking $200 for the copies and then the postage on top of it. So that's the only problem with alien files, because they charge you $2 a page for the copy. But see, if you find it on the genealogy or on the archives website, if you find a name that has a file here in Kansas City, just email me and I can go for free. all I need is the alien registration number. It starts with the letter A and it's followed by I think 9 numbers or something like that, you know, and it'll say A and then have a list of 9 numbers, and all I need is that and your email address. Just send me an email at armeniangenealogy@gmail.com, because like I said, I go down there every 3 or 4 months or so, and I'll just photograph a bunch of files, and I can photograph it for you for free. But don't spread that out too much. I can do it with I can't. And I do it for the Armenian genealogy group all the time. That's just kind of like my thing. I'll go and do that for you. And I'm letting you guys know that now, but don't post that on Facebook or something, because I can't do it for 8 million people.
I think we have another question.
Yeah, one more. This is sort of just like sharing the pain. If you've run into this, I've done a little bit with Google Translate, but specifically, I'm wondering if you've run into place names where the same place will have different names in each language.
Yes, that run into all the time. And the awesome thing is there, is it Bluebird Maps? I think it's called Bluebird Maps. They have different maps of locations of like through time. Mm-hmm. So we were able to find maps of Armenian villages or in Turkey, and their names have changed because they used to be Armenian villages, but all the Armenians were gone after 1915, and they changed the names to Turkish names. And so now you try to go on the internet and try to find, an Armenian town. You just go to Google Maps and type in the name of an Armenian town in Turkey, and you're not going to find it because all the names have been changed. But you can find an old map that shows it in Armenian or something. And that's also the benefit of the Facebook group, because we have people who are like Armenian historians in the group, and we actually have, there's a lot of Turkish people who have been joining the group in the last year or so, because a lot of Turkish people are finding out because of DNA testing that they're actually Armenian or they have Armenian ancestry, because there's a lot of Turkish people who are coming from Armenian, their great grandmother was actually an Armenian girl who was kidnapped, or a lot of the Armenians who did end up living and staying in the area, they weren't killed, or they were taken into a home. And there are stories of Turkish people or Arabs who took people in to save them, but they were forced to change their name. They had to convert to Islam, and they had to change their name to a Turkish name. And so we have a lot, and that stayed hidden because you did not want to be an Armenian in Turkey in 1920. You didn't even want to be an Armenian in Turkey in 1980 or 1990 or 2000. It's only been recently, when people are just starting to come out, that they're actually Armenian, or that they might have even known that their grandmother or great grandmother was Armenian, but no one would talk about that. You might end up getting killed or targeted, it's still an issue over there. So but there's a lot of Turkish people who have started joining the group. So we have boots on the ground, you know what I mean? And so someone can get on the group and say, hey, my family was from Diyarbakir, and they lived on this street. Does anybody know if the home is still there, or whatever? And one of our group members will go down the street with their phone, and they're taking pictures. Here's what's left of the Armenian church. It's just rubble. I mean, literally just rubble. Here's what's left of it. Here's where the old Armenian cemetery was, but the stones are gone. Here's they'll take pictures of things, and they'll tell you the name of the town used to be this, and so a lot of that's, again, the Facebook group is invaluable in that, because there's people there who can tell us the names of the Armenian towns. But to be more specific to your question, Bluebird, I think it's called Bluebird Maps. But even asking in a genealogy group on Facebook, if you're looking for the name of a town, because even in America, the names of towns change, so you could get in a historical group. A lot of the historical societies for different counties have a genealogy page. Or there's, the big groups, like Random Acts of Genealogical Kindness is one on Facebook. But generally speaking, the more, concentrated you get, the more success you might have. I belong to the Historical Society Facebook groups for like every county that my Armenian family lived in, because I can get on there and say, is Hoosick Street still there in Troy, New York? And someone will say, oh yeah, it's still there, and here's a picture of this, and here's a picture of that. Can someone drive by and get a picture of 1901? And they'll do it. It's just amazing. And you guys know this, you're into genealogy. People who are into genealogy, we're all kind of psychopaths. And we all need a 12-step program. And, and we help each other. And so people are happy to do it. They're driving down Hoosick Street anyway. They'll snap a shot of where your great uncle used to live, and they'll post it to the group for you. We do that stuff all the time. So.
More questions? Okay, I just have one quick question. On slide number 25, where you were showing your, excuse me for mispronouncing, Grzechian family tree.
Yes.
If I go back to that slide, let me show it to the class here. I had a question regarding that slide here. Hold on. Okay, the one that says the Gorjukian family tree, and it shows the marvelous picture of your,
Yeah.
I think it was your grandparents on the right-hand side and the tree on the left-hand side. And you said
Yes.
that tree was done in, like, what was it, 1943 or something?
Oh, he wrote it out in 1948. Now, that's not the tree as he wrote it.
Oh, okay, that's what I was wondering.
Oh, no. Yeah, he wrote out the tree it was on several sheets of paper. And then this cousin, did it on this, in this format. But the key down at the bottom is, he sent me a picture in an email of the original tree. And the key down at the bottom was written by my great-grandfather, which is really, really helpful because it says, if the letter A is next to their name, then that means, or it means like I can't see it from here, but they died in France, or they immigrated to Lebanon, or they were born in Turkey but they died in the United States, or they that kind of stuff, or they didn't make it, they were killed, or we don't have any information about this person, and some of the stuff at the very bottom of the tree is stuff that has been added to since, so it actually has more information on it. The stuff that's newer down at the bottom was added later by by this cousin.
Yeah, because it was so well done. I was sitting there thinking, boy, that was like really impressive.
That's not as it was as my great-grandfather wrote it.
Okay, and then I had just a kind of a comment more than a question. Two things that you pointed out, and I've been doing genealogy a very long time, and I use a lot of tools, and I have used YouTube pretty extensively. However, what you've taught me today that I had not actually even thought of, I've been using YouTube to watch like webinars to learn and like how to do things, but it never really occurred to me to use YouTube to go looking for an ancestor. So that's a wonderful piece of advice, and I cannot thank you enough for that.
Oh, and the other ones as well. I've used LinkedIn. I've used Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. I found some of my Khashabjian relatives, and they're actually they're in Dubai. Yeah, and I found them through Instagram.
Yeah, Pinterest is another one.
Oh, Pinterest. One of the.
If you put in a name or something, you come up with relatives' photographs on Pinterest.
Oh, what a great piece of advice.
Yeah. So yeah, the social media aspect has been extremely helpful to me. I found contact information. I've been able to talk to people because of YouTube, because of Instagram, because I've actually found names in those places when I couldn't find them somewhere else. Someone might not have a Facebook account, but they might have a LinkedIn account because, they're professional and they need that, And whenever I contact someone through something like that, I always kind of give my, I'm sorry I'm contacting you this way, and I hope you don't mind that I'm emailing you at your work address, or it's that kind of thing. But this is the only way I know how to contact you. So, and I've never had someone be upset with me or say anything. So, but yeah, YouTube, LinkedIn. I'm trying to think of all the other ones: Instagram, Facebook, just all those things, all the things.
Another thing I wanted to comment on is I do use Google Translate very frequently in my research, but I've only used it up to this point to translate something from another language into English. I had not thought about using it the way you did, about trying to translate the name of a city or county, into another language so you can search for it in another language. I mean, that just really was a new spin for me, and I can't once again thank you enough for that new piece of knowledge.
Absolutely. You know what? Desperate times call for desperate measures. Honestly, that's what, at the time, I hadn't started the genealogy group yet. And so I didn't know anyone who could speak Armenian, and so the only thing I could do was use Google Translate. And it's turned out to be an amazing tool because, like I said, a lot of the documents that I found, you can't find them if you search for them in English. So if I need to find Armenian orphan camps in Lebanon, I need to be writing in Arabic.
Great piece of advice.
Right? Yeah. So, and if you think about it, at some point we all have immigrant ancestors. At some point, or most of us anyway. So, yeah. So if you're looking for, church records of an old church, where they would have been using Gaelic or, or whatever, I'm trying to think of examples, it might help search in that language. And honestly, what occurred to me is as I was doing this, it's like, there have to be Armenians who are trying to do genealogy. And they might have records in Armenian. There have to be, if I have ancestors that ended up in Syria, they're probably speaking Arabic. And there might be information online in Arabic. Just like think of all the GenWeb stuff. You can go on and you can say, before Ancestry and all this other stuff really got big, you could go into like a Yahoo group or whatever and, say, I'm looking for, the Rivest family, in Skokie County, New York or whatever, and then someone else would type something back and you might not see it till 2 or 3 months later or something, but everything has just changed now with the social media. It's just changed and you can find stuff so quickly and, you can get into the groups and ask other people. There's people still living in Skokie County, New York. If you can get yourself in a group for Skokie County, New York, you've got boots on the ground, So it's faster than going through Find a Grave, for example. You can put something on Find a Grave and you could be waiting months, especially if you don't give them a plot number. There's another tip for you. If you're going to put anything on Find a Grave, I'm serious. I am so serious. The difference, I was posting things for Find a Grave, asking people to take pictures of stones on Find a Grave, and they weren't getting answered. They weren't getting answered. And then finally someone wrote back and said, hey, you know what? Big tip. I take photos for Find a Grave. If you want someone to take a picture of that grave, give them a plot number, because nobody wants to go looking through, 20,000 rows of stones trying to find your guy. Call the cemetery, ask them for a plot number, and then give them the plot number. That changed everything. I spent a day just going through, getting online, finding phone numbers for the cemeteries, and asking them for the plot number for whoever. I added that information, and I'm not exaggerating. I mean, within like a week, 2 weeks, there were pictures on the thing. I had been waiting for a couple years, giving the plot number, and now I take photos for Find a Grave now, and I can tell you it makes the huge difference, because nobody wants to spend the time. And some cemeteries have started charging money. I think Find a Grave has become such a big thing, and they have so many people coming in making requests that now they're like, hey, we can make money. It's going to cost you, $10 a lookup or something like that, But if you just call them on the phone, if you show up at the grave, if you show up at the cemetery, and this has happened to me, you show up at the cemetery, you ask them for the grave site, the grave location for so-and-so. Well, it's $10 a lookup. It's like, okay. So you write them a check or you hand them a $10 bill, whatever. But you call them on the phone and they just give it to you. Don't know why. I think just because they don't have really a way to charge you over the phone or something. So.
Okay, any last questions before we sign off? Okay, let's give her a big hand, shall we? Tracy, I cannot thank you enough for your time. I learned a great deal. I know the class did too, and we send a big thank you to you.
You are very welcome. Go Chiefs!
I'll be back in touch with you probably within the next week.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.